Everybody, and I'm so glad that we're able to share this moment together. We'll jump right into it. I'm going to pull this up on the screen over here. Okay, for those of you that are watching on Facebook, I see some people are watching on Facebook. You won't be seeing the slideshow that we have over here, but it's not that much. The discussion today is healthy marital friction. Now, there are three main questions that we're going to discuss, okay? And I hope that everybody can see, whoever's on Zoom can see the questions over here. The first question, the question of the day, is how do I not get bored of my spouse? Okay, many people we deal with today, they get bored of their spouse. They've been married for so long. And so the question is, how do I not get bored being with the same person for so many years? There was someone who, when I was a yeshiva boy, I was probably 15, 16, 17 years old. I walk out and I was telling this person about the 7 commandments, one woman to one man. You only get married once. And this man said, no, there's no way that I could ever do that, because I want different flavors, different people. How could I be stuck with one person for the rest of my life? So that's question number one. How do I not get bored of my spouse? Question number two is, how do we deal with friction in the marriage? Every marriage inevitably has friction. I know my grandfather used to say, until I was married, I was only a half a man. And once I became married, then I was finished. So obviously you have two different people with two totally different, two totally unique people. How is it possible to deal with the friction in the marriage? And then question number three is, what is the purpose of marriage? Now, we're going to answer question one and question two, answer each other. How do I not get bored of my spouse? The answer is, the way that I don't get bored of my spouse is through friction. Now the question, how do I deal with the friction? That is the answer to that, is that the friction, there's friction is something that a marriage has to have, but it has to be done right. In order to understand this, we are going to go answer the third question. The third question is, what is the purpose of marriage? So we're going to jump right into that now. The question, what is the purpose of marriage? We're going to take you to the Genesis, Parshas Bereshis. It says, this is Genesis chapter 2:24. It says, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So the question is, what does it mean for a man and a woman to become one flesh? That is the purpose of marriage, is for two unique people to become one. That means in three areas. There's becoming one in body, in mind, and in emotions. We're going to take this each one separately. In body, it's obvious what it means. And it's a funny thing when I wish a new couple, oh, you should have friction in your life. You should have friction. Think about it like this. Even for in body, for a man and a woman to become one, you can't do it properly without friction. Okay? Now, there's a tradition in Judaism that everything that is physical is just an extension of the spiritual. So if in the physical way, the way that two people can become one is through friction, so it must be that also in your mind and emotions, the way to become one is through friction. Now, what is it in mind? What does it mean to become one? Okay, it's a very common thing in marriage you'll have a misunderstanding between a husband and wife, or she'll want him to do something and he didn't say it, and at the end, after the whole thing is over, so let's say, oh, did you expect me to read your mind? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. In a marriage, a husband and a wife should read each other's mind. That's the goal of marriage, to become one person so much. Not only do you become one in your body, not only do you become one in your mind, you also become one in your mind. I'm sorry. Now, number 3 is emotions. Emotionally, you become one. Emotionally becoming one. There's an interesting book. I'm sure many of you have seen the book, The 5 Love Languages. And it's an interesting book. He says that there are five different languages through which people express love. And forgive me if I get them wrong. There's words of affirmation, acts of service. Then there's physical touch. There's gifts, and then the 5th one is so it's slipping my mind. But at the essence, what these 5 love languages are basically, at the end of the book, he says that you have some people who they start out one way, that they want to be spoken to in one way, that their love language is one love language, and then as time goes on, things change. The essence of it is empathy. The essence is I should not only know what my spouse is thinking, but I should also feel what they're feeling. While they're feeling it, I feel it. There's a story of an older chassid, and he went with his wife to the doctor, and he said, "Doctor, our foot hurts." He didn't say her foot hurts. He didn't say my foot hurts. He said our foot hurts. Feeling each other. Not only do we become, the purpose of marriage is not just to become one in body. It's not just to become one in mind. It's also to become one in emotions. That's empathy. Now we're going to go to how do we become one? How can 2 people become one? And so if you see here on the screen, you have the word ish and isha, man and woman. This is in Hebrew, every word has a significance. And ish and isha, 2 words. If you notice here on the screen, for those of you who are on Zoom, you'll notice that the letters, the top line where it says man, there are 2 letters that are highlighted in yellow, aleph and shin. And the same thing, woman also has the same 2 letters, aleph and shin. And then you have the orange letters. You have the yud and the hey. On the top line, you have a yud for in ish, there's a yud. And on the second line, there's hey for isha, woman. These are 2 separate words. Man and woman, they both have a fire. There's aleph shin means aish. Aish is fire. You see that on line 3, aish is fire. And the yud and hey, the man has the yud and the woman has the hey. Those 2 letters make up God's name. So the Talmud comments on this and says that man and woman both have their own fire. And if the fire of the man and the woman, if they are zoicha, if they're meritorious, if they're not lucky, it's a kind of lucky that you don't get lucky, you make yourself lucky. If they're meritorious, the fire of the man and the woman is the aish of Hashem. If they have Hashem's name there, then it's the fire of God. However, if they're not zoicha, if they're not meritorious, then it is a devouring fire. It's a destructive fire. So we see over here, number 1, man and woman have fire, and there's meant to be fire. You might say that either this fire is going to be the fire of passion, and if it's not the fire of passion, it's going to be the fire of destruction. What is the difference between the fire of passion and the fire of destruction? It is Hashem's name. If you have the Yud and the Hey, then it's the fire of Hashem. If you don't have the Hashem's name, then it's the fire of destruction. Speaking of fire, this will probably remind you of a story that's in the Bible, a story from the Torah. Moses after he ran away from the Pharaoh in Egypt, he was out in the middle of the desert, and he saw a burning bush. And what struck him about this bush is that even though the fire was burning, there was a fire that was coming out of it, but the bush was not being consumed. The normal way when something's burning is that the fuel gets consumed. But he was looking at this bush, and the bush was burning, but even though the bush was burning, it was not being consumed. So marriage is supposed to be the same thing. The passion of marriage is not something that's supposed to be consumable. It's not supposed to burn up. So this fellow who told me, oh, there's no way, young man, that I would ever be able to stay with one woman my whole life because I'm going to get bored of her. Well, the problem is that he doesn't understand the passion of marriage is something that's not supposed to be consumed. If it's the fire of God, if it's the burning bush, the fire will always be there and it will never get burnt up. Now, let's get into practical. You see over here on the, you can see over here on the screen, we have when conflict arises, and it inevitably does, you have two different people, two unique people, and they are becoming one, they're getting married, they're coming together in the same home. Inevitably, there is going to be conflict. There are going to be differences of opinion. So the question is, what do I do when I get into a situation where I say one thing and she says something else? How do I deal with it? There are four options when it comes to confronting friction. And the way that the place that I learned this from is from the way it was in Egypt. The Torah, the Midrash tells us that when the Egyptians came running to the Jews at the sea, right before the sea split, there were four different groups of opinions what to do. The first group said we should jump into the sea. The second opinion said, let's go return to slavery. We'll give up. Let's go back to Egypt. The third opinion was, let's fight the Egyptians. And the fourth one was, let's pray. So in life, when you have a situation of conflict, you have a similar, this story with Egypt is not meant to be something that happened 3,000 years ago. It's something that the reason why the Torah tells us is because it's relevant for us today also. Number one is I can jump into the sea. I have conflict. I'm in a situation of conflict. I can commit suicide, which in the context of marriage means divorce. I'll get divorced. The second option is to return to slavery, which means give up. And you can call that being a yes man, being a subordinate. The third option is to fight the Egyptians, which means just to fight. I'm going to continue. We're just going to be hacking at each other. And the fourth option is to pray. That means sticking your head in the sand, ignoring the problems and pretending they don't exist. I want to stop one here for a second. I'm sitting here talking. I'm telling you all about. Let me go pause the share. I hope everybody can see me here now. I'm assuming here that someone is. I'm taking for granted that there's friction. You don't actually have to have friction. It's possible to not have friction in a marriage. Very, very simple. One spouse will go subordinate. Someone will become the yes man or the yes woman. That the spouse, I'll just do, I don't want to fight, and therefore I'll just give in. I'll do whatever they want. I don't really want to, but that's how it is. That's one of the four opinions. One of the opinions was return to slavery. I'll just give up. All of those opinions were wrong. In Egypt, all of those opinions were wrong. The one who was right was Nachshon ben Aminadab. There was a fifth opinion that was Nachshon ben Aminadab, and he said, let's continue the journey towards Israel. And what that means in the context of marriage is to perpetuate the friction. How do we perpetuate the friction? Perpetuate the friction means that, true, I have my opinion and it's different than your opinion, but somehow there's a way that I can be me and you can be you. Let me pull this up on the screen. I'm sorry. Oh, here we go. Okay. The way to perpetuate the friction is, it's not my way, it's not your way, it's our way. If someone, let's take back to the first the scenario where one of the spouses is going to go subordinate. They're just doing whatever the other one wants. What that essentially means is that there's a part of me that's not married to you, right? Because really, there's something that I don't want to do. But even though I don't want to do it, I'll do it anyways. So that means I'm going to push a part of myself out of our marriage. I'm married to you with the part that I do, but in order for us not to be fighting, I'm going to push part of myself out. Comes the kosher way, the right way of doing it, is it's not your way, it's not my way, it's our way. Every time that we get into a situation where there's friction, there's potential friction because we have a difference of opinion, instead of running away from it, we can go just like Nachshon ben Aminadab, the fifth opinion in the story of Egypt. We're going to continue marching towards where I see now an opportunity for us to become one. The friction itself is the mechanism. The friction is the tool by which we become one. And so practically, how does this play out? If you have a husband and a wife, and now she wants to do this, I'll give you an example. Because I'm that kind of guy. A few weeks ago, it was actually a couple months ago by now, Tanya was in New York, and there was an opportunity there was an opportunity to get something done. It was to enroll in a program, and she has her opinion. I have my opinion. So instead of us, this is something that we've learned from these ideas in the Torah. Instead of me trying to convince her or her trying to convince me or just going subordinate, instead of shying away, on the contrary, what we do, this is an opportunity. The fact that we have a difference of opinion, this is an opportunity for us to become one. Because until we had this disagreement, I was me and you were you. But now that we have a disagreement, this is an opportunity for us to have friction and become one. Because marriage is not my way and it's not your way. Marriage is our way. Now, the next slide, which I hope everybody can see by now, is this another way to say the same idea is that marriage has to be, it has to be possible that I can be 100% me and you can be 100% you, even though we're opposites. I don't extinguish you and you don't extinguish me. That means friction. It's actually how a light bulb works. Not the LEDs or the fluorescence, but the incandescent. It's a fire inside the bulb, but because there's no oxygen, it's not getting burnt up. So what happens, so the fire wants to be 100% fire, and the no oxygen wants to be no fire. So what do you end up having? You have a fire that doesn't get burned up. The fire can't get burned up because there's no oxygen for it to get burnt up with, but the fire is still there. So so marriage has to work. It has to be that I can be 100% me and you can be 100% you, even though we're total opposites. Because many people, they'll come say, "Oh, I can't be with my spouse anymore because we're so different." That has nothing to do with it, because every couple they're going to be opposites. It has to be I can be 100% me and you can be 100% you, even though we're opposites, and that is the perpetual friction. That is that fire. If it's done right, if we have God resting in our marriage, then this is an opportunity for the fire of passion. If it's not the fire of passion, then if it's not done properly, then it's the fire of destruction. Now, I put up this thing on the board over here. You wonder, where did I get this from? This is something that that has been intriguing me. By the way, if you didn't know, the reason we're doing this is in honor of Netanya and my 10th wedding anniversary. The English anniversary was this past week, and our Hebrew anniversary is next week. Someone told me when I was at the chassan classes, we get classes before getting married. So my teacher told me, he said, don't take, this is the marriage advice for you. Don't take marriage advice from anybody who's married less than 10 years. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should take marriage advice from everybody who's married more than 10 years, because as it says in Pirkei Avos, Lo kol hamarba b'schoila machkim, not everybody who's in business a long time necessarily becomes savvy. However, until 10 years, you can't take advice from anybody. So this is something that I've been thinking about for about 11 years now. There's a teaching from the Rebbe, nothing to do with marriage at all. However, I think you'll find it fascinating. Now, I know that everybody who's on, thank you very much, Jana. Whoever's on Facebook, you can't see these slides. I'll make sure to post a link to it afterwards. But there are 3 types of forbidden mixtures in the Torah. Column 1, you'll see it over here. The first type of forbidden mixture is plant and animal seed. You're not allowed to mix the 2 animals. You're not allowed to pair up a dog with a cat to have babies. You're not allowed to pair up a horse and a donkey. And the same thing with plants. You're not allowed to mix the seeds of plants together. Okay? A second kind, so that's the first kind, is mixing plant or animal seed. The second kind of forbidden mixture is called shatnez. In shatnez, it's an acronym, and it means that we do not mix wool and linen in clothing. So whenever I buy a suit, I take it to the shatnez checker. They have a guy with a microscope, and he knows where to pull the strings. And he pulls strings out of the suit and he checks it under a microscope to make sure that you don't have wool and linen in the same garment. The third kind of forbidden mixture is milk and meat. You're not allowed to mix milk and meat together. So what is the status? If you see over here, I'm sorry for everybody who's watching on Facebook. It's harder to see, but I think everybody who's in Zoom can see it. Plant and animal seed, you're never allowed to mix. You're never allowed to, it's always something that's always forbidden. What about the shatnez, the wearing wool and linen garments? Usually you're not allowed to wear it. However, during a mitzvah, like wearing tzitzis or priestly garments, then you're allowed to wear shatnez. So in other words, if my tzitzis or my talis that I wear on Shabbos, if it was made out of, if the garment was wool and the strings were made out of linen or vice versa, then it would be kosher during the daytime while I'm doing the mitzvah. And the third is milk and meat. We don't mix milk and meat together. So one of the commentaries explains, why is it that you can't mix milk and meat together, milk and meat and all of these different things? Because each of these things, you're mixing two different worlds together. Kabbalistically, each thing has its own world. There's the world of horses and there's the world of donkeys. Mixing them together is not kosher. Same thing, wool and linen. Wool comes from sheep. It comes from animals. Linen is something that comes from plants. So mixing wool and linen together is something, you're mixing two worlds together. And then milk and meat. Milk is white. Milk is dairy, it's white. White is the color of pure, and meat is red. Red is the color of severity, it's a strong color. And so mixing chesed and gvura, mixing these two worlds is something that you're not supposed to do. So as far as the status, mixing the plant and animal seed is something you're never allowed to do. Wool and linen is something you're only allowed to do during a mitzvah. And milk and meat is something, it's a question in the Talmud. The conclusion is you're not allowed to mix it. So the Rebbe in one of his sichas explains that the logic, why is it that plant and animal seed you're never allowed to mix, wool and linen you are allowed to mix when you're doing a mitzvah, and milk and meat, it's a question, but the conclusion is that you're not allowed to mix it. The Rebbe explained that it boils down to two things. Thing number one is column number 3 that you see here, whether the mixture is separable. You talk about a plant an animal seed. If you take an orange seed with an apple seed and you put it together and you plant a new tree, you come out with a tangerine or a tangeapple, whatever they're called. And now you have this new fruit, this big tree that came from the two seeds that were put together. Or you have a mule that was born, the mother is a donkey and the father is a horse. Try taking out the donkey from the mule. You can't do it. Try taking out the orange from this fruit, from the tangerine. You can't. These two things have come together in a way that they are inseparable. They've lost their identities. Wool and linen garments, on the other hand, I actually had this once. I had a very expensive, it was an expensive suit. I got it for really cheap because because they lost the pants for it. So I had the jacket. And I took it to the shatnez guy. He takes it under the microscope and he said, even before he started, he said, I can tell you that this is going to be shatnez. It's going to have linen. Linen they only put in the lining of expensive suits. So however, I paid him a couple extra bucks and he pulled the whole thing out. And he replaced the lining inside, and I still have the suit jacket. So shatnez is something, when you mix the threads of wool and linen together, even though they become one garment, but they've become one in a way that you can separate them afterwards. However, and what about milk and meat? If you have a pot of milk and you throw a piece of meat into it, or you have a pot of meat and you throw some cheese into it, what's the status then? Well, it's kind of this and it's kind of that. I mean, you can always pull the piece of meat out, but for those of you who are familiar with the halacha, chaticha nasa nevela, there's a noisen tam. The taste, even though you can pull the meat out, but you can't separate the taste that the meat gave to the pot. So what does all this have to do? The question is, are man and woman different worlds? Just like you're not supposed to mix the world of plant and the world of animal with You don't mix plant and animal with shatnez, and you don't mix the two different kinds of animal seeds because they're two different worlds. Are man and woman different worlds? Maybe you could say they're Mars and Venus. Man and woman. I was thinking, as this is before I got married, I'm thinking to myself, well, if a horse and a donkey shouldn't get married, then maybe a man and a woman shouldn't get married. They're also two different worlds. So what I learned from this teaching of the Rebbe is you need two conditions in order to permit these opposites. In order for two opposites to come together, there are two conditions that they must have in order for it to work. If they don't have these two conditions, then it's a forbidden mixture. If they do have the two conditions, then it is permitted. Number one is that each individual must retain their identity 100% in a way that they're separable and identifiable. So like you see with the wool and linen, you can pull the wool out of the linen, you can pull the linen out of the wool. They have their own identity. If they lose their identity, like it is with the seeds of the animals, then it's not kosher. The second condition is that it has to be in the context of a mitzvah. So the shatnez, even though you're allowed to wear shatnez, it's only in the context of a mitzvah. If you're wearing tzitzis or if you're in the temple and the priestly garments were made out of wool and linen, those are the two conditions you have to have. So in the context of marriage, what does that mean? In order for Mars and Venus to come together, in order for a man and a woman to come together, they have to come together in a way that each one retains their identity. I'm different than you. I'm 100% me, and you're going to be 100% you. And even though we're total opposites, the reason that it can work is because it's for the sake of a mitzvah. The reason that we're in this marriage is not because I want to get pleasure or I need someone to take care of me or I want financial stability or all the other reasons that someone could get married. If I'm married for the sake of doing a mitzvah, if it's for the sake of God, and you have the second condition that each individual retains their identity, then it's possible for it to work. At this time, so let's review for a second. The point is, let's go back to our original three questions. Question number one is, how do I not get bored of my spouse? The reason I don't get bored of my spouse is because there's always friction. There's always something new. The light bulb is always new. It's always getting new energy. It's always on. Why is it on? Because it's never getting consumed. There's a fire that's burning, and it's the fire of passion. Question number two, how do we deal with friction in the marriage? The way that we deal with friction in the marriage is by jumping right into the friction. Don't run away from the friction. When I disagree with my spouse, instead of running away and saying, "Oh, I'll be a tzaddik, I'm gonna subordinate, I'll become a yes man, do whatever she says." No, I'm not gonna become a yes man. Of course, I'm not gonna be rude. I'm not gonna be disrespectful. But if two people are coming together to become one person, it has to be 100% me and 100% her. Otherwise, if it's only 90%, then we're only 90% married. We're only 90% one. So how do we deal with the friction in marriage? You jump into the friction and you perpetuate that friction. Every time that there's a disagreement, you're about to get into an argument and you say, hold on one second, I'm going to take 2 steps back. I'm going to think to myself, hold on one second. This is not something, a bad thing that we're about here to argue. This is a good thing. The good thing is we have an opportunity to become one. How do we become one? We have to sit here and talk about our differences and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. And that friction is what creates the passion. And then the third question, which we answered first, what is the purpose of marriage? The purpose of marriage is for 2 people to become one. With that, I'm going to turn off the Facebook Live, and everybody that's on Zoom, I'm going to go unmute, and so you can ask your questions. Thank you, everybody, and good night, Facebook. Okay, let's...